Hello, everyone. This is Rick, and welcome to Astral Club. This is Searching for Jesus, Astral Club Edition. Before we get into it, just want to mention Patreon. If you'd like to support the channel on Patreon, you can do so. When you do, you get advanced episodes on Sunday, a library of downloaded episodes for your podcast app. There's a Patreon email where we can talk back and forth. There's a chat section. There's a direct mail section. All kinds of sections for communicating with other patrons and yours truly. And if that's something that you're interested in, you will find a link in the description. Next up, private lessons, the Astral Project. I've got people all over the place. Matter of fact, I've got one tonight from a soldier who's an IT specialist in South Korea. So, I mean, that's neat, although I have to do it late at night so that he can do it in the afternoon. Well, that's what happens when you're dealing with someone halfway across the world. Anyway, if you're interested in getting information on lessons, all you have to do is go down to the description, and there's an email there. Just ask for information. Okay. Last week, I talked about what I was going to do. Real briefly, the idea was to go back in time and find ancient Jerusalem at the right time, which is probably somewhere between 30 and 33 AD or CE, if you want to use the more politically correct term, and see if I can find Jesus and possibly communicate with him if possible. So this is not some thought form. This is not something that I'm making up in my mind, or this isn't some record in the Akashic records. This is real. So that is the idea behind all of this. And last week I got into some of the ethics of trying to get back to the past and possibly change it. And whether that was even possible, whether it was even possible to change the past. Before I get into this real quick, I think it's necessary to talk about not the ethics, but more about the mechanics. Is it even possible to change the past? I mean, if I do something in the past, it'll always have happened, right? I mean, when I come forward, it'll always have happened. Now, I know there's obviously various fiction that says otherwise. For instance, if you do Back to the Future, Michael J. Fox, through some manipulations and fun adventures on skateboards, changes the past. And now his parents aren't losers anymore. Now they're rich, and the father isn't a piece of crap. He's now treating Biff like a piece of crap. And somehow he's now a neutered servant for the family. I guess they overlooked the whole little attempted rape of his wife. After all, forgive and forget, right? So, but he's able to change the past, Now he's got a car and everything's great. And then there's something else in fiction, which really I really loved when I was a kid. I loved reading Ray Bradbury. And there was a short story, very famous short story, A Sound of Thunder. And in this story, this is going to be a long one, by the way, so strap in. In this story, A Sound of Thunder, there is a time travel company. And of all the things that they could do, it's a big game hunting company. It's for, I guess, rich a-holes who are done shooting elephants in the face, and they're bored. So now they want to do something more interesting. So this company is set up to take people back into the past to shoot T-Rexes. Because, hey, if you can go back into the past, what else would you rather do than shoot a dinosaur? So, but the company is not completely nuts. Apparently what they do is they do their research. They go back in the past. They have this carefully set up pathway so that nothing gets crushed or what have you, and you have to stay on the pathway. And apparently they locate a likely dinosaur or T-Rex or whatever that is 1 minute away from falling into the nearest tar pit. So that way, you're not killing a dinosaur that wasn't going to die anyway. It's just, you get a chance to kill it before it falls into to the tar pit. So before this traveler, this hunter, goes back into the past, he's talking about politics. And he says, oh, there's two candidates, and one of them I really like. He's a liberal, he's a nice guy. And the other is a complete jerk who is going to overthrow the government and all the rest of that. And of course, this is a completely unrealistic scenario. But anyway, but there's no problem because the one who's the nice guy doesn't have dementia, and he's definitely going to win. So he's happy to go back into the past and hunt. So he goes back into the past, and he's walking along the path, and he's getting ready to shoot the dinosaur. And oops, he falls off the path and ends up crushing some big bug. And actually, The Simpsons had an episode where they kind of made fun of this too. That's a classic. And he's like, well, what's the big deal? What could possibly change about crushing some big old mosquito or whatever in the past? So anyway, he goes back to the present, and everything's changed. Now everybody's half literate, and the bad guy is a shoo-in to be the next president. So he's like, oh my goodness, by killing that big bug, I've changed all of time. Okay, it was an interesting and a fun story. But I don't agree with either one of these fictional things. Because if you really went back and you really did something that could quote unquote change the past, then when you got back, it was always the past. See what I'm saying? If you went back and prevented, let's say you could prevent Lincoln from being assassinated somehow, when you got back, you would literally, possibly, be the only person with a memory of two histories. One where Lincoln got shot, and one where he just went on to be president and he did all kinds of stuff. And if you tried to convince everybody else, they would be like, what are you talking about? Lincoln was never shot. So even if you could somehow change this past, you wouldn't get any glory from it because everyone would be like, what are you talking about? So in my case, if I was able, say, to go back and I did something that somehow prevented Christianity from happening, when I got back, I would imagine that at best, I would have two memories. One in which I went to church every Sunday, and another in which I sacrificed at the temple of Athena on a regular basis. Or some Roman god, Juno or whatever. But everybody else would be, they'd be like, what are you talking about? You changed the past and prevented Christianity. What the heck are you talking about? No one's ever heard of anything like that. This guy must be nuts. So, from a certain standpoint, even if it was possible, it's not going to be recognized because it's always been that way. Now, there is a little thing called the Mandela effect. And if you want some fun, you can kind of check into that. And it's an interesting situation, and I know scientists have an explanation for it. They have an explanation for every darn thing. But it's where you have different memories than everyone else does. In the Mandela effect, there are people who recall Mandela dying in prison and not becoming the first president, or whatever, of the first African president of South Africa. And there's people who swear they remember him dying in prison. I personally don't have that one, but I do have something stupid. I do have this other memory, which I'm not the only one. I remember clearly that if you recall the Berenstain Bears, when you were a kid, those books, I recall clearly the Berenstain Bears. Now, I didn't read the books. My daughter didn't read the books. Well, she was aware of them. It was a TV show, I believe. But I recall taking her when she was about 5 years old to an amusement park. And at this amusement park, they had this big color statue painted of these bears. And I remember reading the plaque, Berenstain Bears. And I, using my clever sense of humor, said to my daughter, hey, do you think they keep kosher? Berenstain Bears. She didn't really get the joke, but I thought it was funny as heck, which is the way my jokes normally work. I think they're funny. But now, if you check, it's always been Berenstain. Now, I'm not the only one who remembers this, but it's always been Berenstain if you check it out. Now, why would I make a joke like that about the word Berenstain? It would be stupid. It wouldn't make any sense whatsoever. Berenstein is funny because then they're like Jewish bears. Berenstain makes no sense. So I have that memory, lots of others do. What does that mean? Is there someone back there who's somehow changing time, and maybe they're doing it for the government, and maybe they're trying to send us hints, little hints, changing little things somewhere as little breadcrumbs that maybe, that's their way of trying to clue in the Americans or whatever that this is going on. Or maybe that's just some weird conspiracy theory. But there you go. I mean, maybe you remember, what the bears were called. At any rate, there's a lot going on with all of this. As far as, changing the past, can it be done? And if it can be done, will you ever be able to prove it? Or possibly, will there be a shadow number of people out there that somehow have a shadow memory of something different? Who knows? But let's get back to Jesus now, and let's get back to my search for Jesus, because I said I was going to let you know last week my failures and eventually any successes that I had and what I discovered. And we can kind of go from there. Okay, first up, my first few trips were failures. I couldn't even open up a time portal. I've said this before, but what I usually do is I fly downhill faster and faster with the thought of a time zone or a place. Generally not both, because my success rate with both is not very high. I guess it's just tough for my poor brain to hold those two things together. I mean, I can get to a place in the past. I can get to a time in the past. Trying to make them both at the same time is a little bit more problematical. But the first couple times, I couldn't even get a window to open. So because I went down this hill, went faster and faster, and nothing. No time portal. What generally happens if I'm successful is a portal opens quickly, and then I got to go through it, and it quickly closes. So it happens very quickly if I'm successful. And then what happens is I have a sensation of going down some sort of a tunnel. You might even describe it as a wormhole. I lose consciousness, at least if it's a very long time travel. If it's just a year or two, I may not lose consciousness. But if it's longer, I lose consciousness. And then I regain consciousness, and I'm at that place and or time. So my first couple attempts, I didn't even get to the portal. The first time the portal opened, I appeared in, I think, the right geographic area, but all I saw was just small little villages. I couldn't find any sizable habitation, so I think I way overshot it. And it was way back in the past when the Jews were just really wanderers and really just had small little villages. So I got pulled back to my body. On the next attempt, I really concentrated on Jerusalem, big time. And I appeared above the city of Jerusalem, and I was extremely happy. I was thrilled, so thrilled that I almost got pulled back. You gotta watch the emotions. You have to keep them muted. Or else your automated system senses a threat and it'll pull you back. But I managed to calm down, and I got a little bit closer because I was thousands of feet up. As I went down, I saw the Temple Mount, and the Temple Mount is pretty sizable. I would say it takes up maybe around 1/7 or so of the walled city of Jerusalem. But what I saw was a wreck. the temple was demolished and there was nothing but a wall or so standing. It was literally just completely destroyed. So I must have arrived the right place, the wrong time. The temple was destroyed in 70 CE, roughly 40 years or so after Jesus died. So that was obviously the wrong time. I ended up going back to my body. On the next time, I arrived at Jerusalem again. I was happy about that, so I went down and the temple was there. So, okay, good. But I started flying around the city. I didn't see any Roman soldiers. Now, the time period I'm looking for, somewhere between 30 and 33 AD, preferably right around the time of Passover, there was Roman soldiers crawling all over the place. I mean, they were always there to keep the peace at this time period. But around Passover, they always beefed up their patrols. I'm a bit of a Roman historian. I love Roman history. They beefed up their patrols because right around Passover, there was a lot of Jews who would come from other places. So, I mean, the city was just full of all kinds of people there. And whenever there's a lot of people together, especially a population that's a bit resentful of being under the Roman thumb, paying Roman taxes, Roman laws, and they didn't like it. So there were always a ton of Roman soldiers, but especially at Passover. I didn't see a Roman soldier anywhere. Yet the temple was there. So that told me I overshot it again. Not by as much as the first time I overshot it, but I obviously got there before the Romans came and made the province of Judea a Roman province. So I ended up going back to my body because I'd run up my time. Keep in mind that these past trips, and I've mentioned this many times before, but it's probably worth mentioning again. Going far into the future, I have a lot of objective and subjective time to spend doing things. I've got more power to enter and be involved with the people of that time. So I've got more freedom of action and the ability to do so and to be seen. But as you go into the past, the amount of time that you can spend there is always measured in precious minutes. So there really isn't a lot of time to do a lot of trial and error. You go there and you hope you're really close to where you want to be because you're not going to have a lot of time. Anyway, so I got pulled back on that time. On my next trip, I think I was really close to the right time. The temple was there in one piece, and I saw Roman patrols all over the place. I did like a scan of the mines in the area as I flew above the peoples, just doing a light scan, and I couldn't find any thoughts at all about any kind of Yeshua bar Joseph of Nazareth. So I figured I might be a little early because no one's thinking about him. And according to the Bible, for that period of time after he entered the city and until he was crucified, he was kind of the talk of the town. So I should be able to sense some thoughts about him, and nothing. I mean, all the usual thoughts about, oh, am I going to be able to sell this for a good price? Oh, I hate my neighbor. He makes a lot of noise. I mean, all the usual kind of crap. It's amazing. It's not that different from what you get walking through a Costco today. It really isn't. Our technology has changed, but we as humans really haven't changed any real degree. So I figured that I might be still a little early. ended up going back to my body again. The next time I tried to concentrate on the same way that I did the last time, but maybe try to advance it a little bit, if that makes sense. I popped up right over high above where the temple was. So the temple was there. I cast down my scan, still nothing about any kind of Jesus. We're going to call him Jesus. I don't want to say all that other stuff. Still nothing about him. But I was right by the temple. And I said, Rick, you know what? This is not your central mission, but you have to at least quickly check out the temple. So I lowered myself and I went down. Now, real briefly, I'm going to give you a history lesson because I know how much everybody loves history lessons. We're talking about the second temple here. The first temple was famously built by Solomon using the slave labor of demons, and that's a whole nother interesting story if you ever want to investigate that. But this is the second temple. Now, according to secular accounts, the second temple was completed somewhere around 516 BCE. However, Jewish sources say no. It was built around 350 BCE. You'd think they'd be able to get closer figures between each other. That's a big gap. Anyway, the temple was supposedly built by some guy named Zerubbabel, who was the nephew of Sheshbazzar. I guess nobody was named Joe or Bob, because what fun is it calling somebody Joe or Bob when you can say Sheshbazzar? Anyway, apparently around 522 BCE, they were doing this. I guess there was a decree by Cyrus II, who was called Cyrus the Great, who was the king of Persia. And in 538 BCE, he did some sort of decree that allowed the Jews to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. You see, many years before, the Babylonians had invaded Judea and had destroyed the first temple and taken the Jews captive into Babylonia. You may have seen a famous frieze of a bunch of Jewish slaves and a big golden menorah all being taken away to Babylon. So they were held there prisoner and used as slave labor until Cyrus the Great decided to free them. So anyway, the temple was built using hewn stone and wooden beams to reinforce the walls. The temple itself was about 90 feet tall. It had 2 courtyards. Now, the inner one was measuring 750 by 150 feet, and it was surrounded by chambers, gates, and a public square. Now, the second temple was a more modest version of the original building and didn't include the ritual objects of the first temple, which were destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BCE. One of the big things, of course, that disappeared was the Ark of the Covenant. And, Indiana Jones tried to find it. He thought he found it in what he called the Well of Souls, and that's a whole theory. Nobody knows exactly where the Ark ended up, or if it still exists today. Some think that it was taken down to Ethiopia, that by priests who knew Jerusalem was going to fall, so they snuck that out. And matter of fact, there's a temple in Ethiopia to this day that claims that they have the Ark of the Covenant, but you can't see it. So, I don't know. It's anybody's guess whether it still exists and whether, if you take a look at it, it turns your face to mush, like at the end of the movie Indiana Jones. And the Lost Ark. So it's not going to be there. The second temple's not going to have some of that cool stuff. But I still wanted to check it out because it is a historic event, and you can't see it anymore because it was destroyed by the Romans in 70 CE. So I figured, what the heck? I'm here. I still have a few minutes. Let's check it out. I might be in trouble, ladies and gentlemen, because out of a clear sky, all of a sudden, I look outside, and there is an unpredicted dark sky with a thunderstorm. And you might hear some thunder in the background. Perhaps that'll add to the whole atmosphere. Let's see if I can get this done before the wrath of God takes me out. And I like to think that I'm joking. Okay. I flew down, and there was a pretty big complex. It was very much the coolest things I saw, other than some of the courtyards, where they had these 4 big fires that were in these huge golden pans that were on these large poles that were very high into the sky. And so they kind of framed this courtyard, and there was 4 of them, and I kind of flew up and just took a look at it pretty quick, and it was kind of cool because they were, lit and burning. But I didn't have time, so I wanted to go into the temple. I went through the huge doors into the temple. It was definitely every bit of 90 feet tall. It wasn't as fancy as I imagined. It wasn't as big as I imagined. I walked in, and what I saw were a few priests in white going about, maybe white and gilt. I don't know if they had a little gold on, I think. Maybe their ropes, around their robes. I don't know. It wasn't very fancy, though. I mean, there was some gilt, but there was 3 basic areas. There on either side, in the middle of the temple, there was one altar on the right-hand side. There was a menorah on the left-hand side. And right in the center, in front of these 2 very huge tapestries, which must have taken forever for somebody to sew, which I imagine was protecting the Holy of Holies, there was another little altar with some horns on it, or wings. I can't, it could have been one or the other. I quickly went in, and I saw on the right-hand side, there was, there was a small little altar there. And there was some objects on there. There was loaves of bread. There was a cup with some wine in it. And there was some yellow resin that was being burned. I'm assuming it was frankincense. I'm sure if my astral body had some senses, it would be able to smell what it was. But that's what was burning in this little container. On the other side, on the left-hand side, basically this is how I'm walking in. That's what I'm using for a reference. On the left-hand side, there was this huge menorah, and there was a priest doing some prayers or something around it. If I sound rushed, it's because I was rushed, so I'm trying to give you the sense of how I was perceiving things. And then I went right up to that central altar with those horns or some sort of wings. They had red on them, so it looked to me like there had been blood put on them. So I wondered if that played some sort of role in a sacrificial situation. Now, I didn't go into the Holy of Holies, probably because I had some worries that there'd be a pop-up thunderstorm like there is now. I've got this whole thing that I try not to tread upon other people's beliefs. And I know that that the only people who are allowed to go into essentially the place of God was the high priest. And he was only allowed to do that once a year. So as much as I was curious, I didn't go in out of respect. Just like a Muslim once asked me if I'd ever gone to Mecca and looked around. And I told him no, and I was being truthful, because even though I could do it, I know you shouldn't do it, because unless you're a Muslim, you're not supposed to go to Mecca. And I've heard stories, especially going back to the 19th century, where some Englishman would disguise himself as an Arab Muslim, and he got into the city and looked around. And back in the 19th century, he was all very clever and he was praised, but I always thought it was very disrespectful. So I'm not going to disrespect this religion. Even though it's not mine, it's still something that I respect. So right around that period of time anyway, I started getting pulled back. So I went back to my body. So, that was my real quick thumbnail sketch of what I saw in the second temple. It was a little underwhelming. I guess I was judging it based on some ancient Roman temples and things. But I guess simplicity. It was the name of I think that type of religion. It was less about ostentation and more about spirituality. So there we go. Okay. On my next projection, I was soaring over the city and I sensed lots of thoughts about Jesus. Apparently, he had entered and he had attracted a lot of attention. And so he was quite the buzz, but I couldn't locate him. I tried scanning, but I couldn't locate him. So I knew I had some time left. What else could I do? I mean, I guess I could look at the temple again, but I decided that I was going to go over and check out Herod's temple. But more specifically, I was going to check out where Pontius Pilate would be, because it must be near Passover. And if Pilate was here, he'd be in Herod's temple, because that's where the praetorium was. That's where he would take up his office. So I decided to go check him out. Now, he in Herod's temple was located essentially on the other side of the city from the temple. So it was pretty easy to find. I mean, as I was soaring over on my left, I saw the mass of the city and the buildings, people's homes, and all that kind of thing. But I could definitely see Herod's palace, and I kind of concentrated on, well, I didn't have to concentrate too hard on the praetorium, because I saw lots of Roman soldiers guarding an area of that complex. So, being the genius that I am, I figured, well, with all those soldiers, there must be a Roman there they're guarding. So I went into this area, and there was a big entranceway. It was a big hallway. It was very ornate and it had red drapes with Roman eagles on it, and it was all very nice. But I didn't sense anybody, so I was just kind of running around, trying to sense, where someone like him might be. I mean, there's guards everywhere, but that wasn't what I was looking for. And then off in a little room that was lit by a couple oil lamps, I saw a middle-aged man working, writing out something. And he was, I'd say he was about he was sitting down. I'd say he was probably about 5'8". He was definitely middle-aged. I saw he had black hair, but it was graying. Let's call it salt and pepper. He had a bald spot on top of his head, and believe me, I know how that feels. You could tell that he used to be kind of in shape, but now good living had kind of given him a bit of a paunch. And I scanned his mind, and all I did was a very light scan. That's all I could have done anyway. He had a very powerful, very well-disciplined mind. But I got his name, Pontius Pilatus. The anglicized version, Pontius Pilate. I was like, whoa, this is the guy. This is the governor, the Roman governor of Judea. I mean, this is the one. So I was a little bit taken back at first, but I didn't have an awful lot of time here. Now, I had been thinking for a while about what I should do. Should I interfere with this at all? And I had really examined my soul. And I kind of came up with the idea, if I could prevent suffering of someone, wouldn't that be worthwhile? I mean, everything else aside, if I could prevent a man from suffering, wouldn't that be worth my time? Maybe that's a bit simplistic, but those were my thoughts. Now, I couldn't do much because this man's mind was extremely disciplined. But I just kind of left him with a vague feeling of unease about this Jesus guy. That's all I could do. Now, I know I still had a few minutes left, so I cast about for another mind that maybe I could kind of influence. Maybe I'm wrong about this. Probably am. But I found a female mind nearby, and I could sense that she was wealthy and her name was Claudia. I assumed that she must be someone important, because why else would a wealthy woman be here? She might have even been the wife of the man himself, and she was in a light sleep, and her mind was much easier to influence, especially in this state. So I tried to formulate a message that would mean something to an ancient Roman. And I said, leave Jesus of Nazareth alone. He is a bad omen for your family. Family was a big thing to the ancient Romans. Bad omens were big things to the ancient Romans. They used to sacrifice chickens and other animals to find out whether a battle was auspicious or whether the signs were auspicious for a Roman victory. So they were very superstitious people. And I figured if I could leave a thought like that in her mind, if she was indeed influential or Pontius's wife, then she might be able to influence him in a way that, could prevent the horrible torture and eventual execution of Jesus. It was at that point in time that I got pulled back to my body once again. In my final trip to the past in this search for Jesus, I landed in the right time and place. I can't tell you for certain which Passover it was between 30 and 33, because I was no longer concentrating on a year. I was concentrating on that feeling that I'd had the last time. And that's what got me back. This time I spent a little bit more time just scanning, and I located what I thought was the right person. There was a certain weird, powerful mind that was unusual. And when I touched it, it felt powerful. And so if it wasn't some magician, it might definitely, I thought, have been Jesus. I zoomed in on it, and it was in the lower city where a lot of the Jews lived. And I saw a man being rushed through an alley wearing a hooded robe with other men around him. And I sent a thought message at him to see if I could possibly scan him or whatever. He turned around and looked at me. And all I saw was a well-tanned face. It was, attractive for a male. He had a beard and a thinner type mustache. He had dark eyes, but you could tell they were discerning eyes. They were sensitive eyes, and they were looking right at me. And I was going to approach him when my angel appeared right in front of me, blocking my path. He looked at me and simply thought the word no. And I started to remonstrate. I started to protest. And once again, he gave me a much sterner no, return. Well, I knew there was no way. There's no way I'm going to overcome him. He's much more powerful than I am, and I'm not that foolish. So I returned to my body. I have a sense now that I'm in the doghouse and that I'll be in the doghouse for a while. I'm not going to try to approach him because he was angry. And I've never seen him angry before. And you know what it's like when you're dealing with someone who never shows anger and you've known them for a long time and then suddenly they do and you're like, whoa. Well, obviously I had overstepped my bounds. I know someone asked me before, like, shouldn't you talk to your angel or whatever? And I guess maybe I had a little bit of a forethought that, I'd rather ask for forgiveness, that whole thing, than ask for permission. I just had this idea that it would be a no-go, so I didn't want to ask or didn't want to approach him. And I thought I could pull this off without being interfered with. But obviously, what I was about to do was forbidden. And so that was my search. And I'm sorry that it's not more interesting. I wish I had gotten a chance to have a dialogue with him. I would have shared that with you. I'm sure it would have made for a better episode, but all I can do is tell you what happened. So it is what it is. So be mad at me if you like, but that's what happened. So after this long journey, and I feel exhausted. I really haven't slept much since all this. At any rate, if you like that, please hit the like button, share it with those of like minds. Subscribe if you haven't already. Questions and comments, please. And the thunderstorm is looking worse and worse. So hopefully we'll get a chance to talk at some later date. At any rate, this is Rick, and I will see you on the astral plane.